Hello and welcome to this DGC presentation titled The Game Production Pipeline, Developing a Game from Concept to Completion. My name is Ahmad Jadallah and I'm the Director of Development at Semaphore. Semaphore was established in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia back in 2010 by our founder, Mr. Ahmad Jadallah. The goal is to develop locally developed high-quality production value projects across games, movies, virtual reality, and augmented reality projects. So we always aim to utilize game technology and game engine technology to aid gaming and non-gaming applications. And even within gaming, we try to tackle different genres and experiment with new and exciting features all the time. Semaphore is licensed for development on current and next-gen consoles, in addition to mobile PC, VR, and AR. This includes the recently released PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and Series S, in addition to Nintendo Switch. We worked with several government and private sector entities, different ministries, as well as different educational and private sector fields for the past 10 years. And this did not go unrecognized. In fact, we were featured at the PC Gaming Show at E3 2016 Los Angeles. We were also featured as part of the Sony PlayStation Plus collection in 2014. We worked with NVIDIA, with Qualcomm to showcase our projects at GITEX. And we were picked as the Apple Editor's Choice for one of our projects. And we won the True Gaming Award for Best Arab Game in 2018. Now, to give you a background about myself, I worked in the game industry for the past 15 years as a director, consultant, jury, and a speaker at several events, and had the great pleasure of leading some of the most talented developers in the region. I won several first-place technology awards in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and the Middle East. My previous work has been covered on several media outlets, including newspapers, magazine articles, radio stations, and TV channels, including BBC World and CNBC. Let's start with the basics. So, in a typical game development environment, there are different team roles that needs to be filled, starting with the director of the operation. There will be several other roles such as production, design, animation, programming, art, audio, writing, and quality assurance. And within each of those specific roles, there are sub-categories. So there are going to be the leads, the seniors, and the juniors, depending on the scale of the project. Many indie game developers tend to do multiple of these roles and wear multiple hats in order to see the projects through. So it can be done by one person, and it can be done by a small team up to several hundreds of developers that are scattered around multiple different locations around the globe. Now, the main engine of creation is the game engine, which is a suite of tools that allow you to create your game and export it to your target platform. Some of those game engines are made for in-house use, and some can be licensed. And some of them are geared toward hobbyists and beginners, while others are targeting pro developers. To take a look at the available game engines in the current game industry, there are internal ones, as we mentioned. So starting with the Frostbite engine by EA, Snowdrop by Ubisoft, which is actually part of by Ubisoft Massive specifically, the Decima engine. The commercial ones available are obviously Unity being the most famous, Unreal being the most used in commercial titles, and CryEngine, which is always known to be a powerhouse in terms of graphical prowess on whatever console it debuts on. There are other more hobbyist and beginner-friendly engines such as the Godot engine, Buildbox, and GameMaker Studio as well. In addition to game engines, we typically use something called the DCC, or the Digital Content Creation Tools. So depending on the type of game that you're creating and the type of assets, for 2D, you can find tools like Photoshop and Paint.net. Some of them are free, and some of them are going to be licensed for a fee. In the 3D space, 3D Studio Max and Maya being the most industry-recognized tools, but there is also Blender, which is a free tool that is gaining popularity and traction among indie developers. For audio, we have things like SoundForge, Audacity, and Adobe Audition. In general, with a few key differences, the game development pipeline mimics the production phases found in a typical movie production. So we have phases like pre-production, production, and post-production. Starting with phase 1, the pre-production. Now, the goal of this phase is to establish a general idea about the game that we're making. What kind of characters are going to be driving the experience? What do they look like? What is their backstories, etc.? What kind of environments the action will take place in? And what are the story beats, if any? And we say if any because a lot of games don't simply need a story. So it could be based on Twitch response, on certain players' skills, and not always kind of a story-driven experience. But if you do have a story experience, the best practices to follow in traditional genres are also best practices found in the game industry. And also, what kind of gameplay style is the player going to be doing, which is a key difference from a traditional linear media, because a game needs to be played in the end. It needs to be fun and engaging for the player to see it through. So here we define those general styles. There is a concept called the GAMP principle, which is an acronym for genre, audience, platforms, and perspective. And those are things that we need to kind of identify at the beginning of the game production cycle. So in terms of genre, there are several well-known and well-established genres throughout the years since the start of the game industry. Things like, the beat-em-ups, the hack-and-slash shooters, adventure games, racing, and platformers. But there are also kind of different genres that are more specific in meaning. Things like role-playing game, RTS or real-time strategy, stealth genre, twin sticks, Metroidvania, and Infinite Runners. And then there are the modern genres, so the survival crafter, the battle royale, Souls-like, looter shooters, and kind of non-gaming specific genres such as edutainment, and even games that mix several of these genres to create something new. Next, we need to define what kind of platforms our game is going to be launched on. And this is important because this dictates the technical plan for the project. What kind of engine you're going to be using for this particular platform, what kind of tools, the polygon budget, the art style that are possible on each of those platforms. If you need fast hard drive access, then the SSDs in next-gen consoles, for example, are a more suitable fit than a traditional mechanical drive found in the older ones. So those kind of considerations are identified at the beginning of the project. Another important aspect is where your audience is for this particular type of game that you're building. So some games that are more story-driven, more experiential, are best suited for consoles as opposed to mobile games, for example, that are more focused on progression and having a satisfying player experience. Next, we define the camera perspective that we want to use. Is it a third-person camera perspective where you see the full character in view? Is it first-person through the eyes of the player? Is it isometric, side-scroller, over-the-shoulder, or top-down? Now, some games obviously feature the ability to switch between different camera types depending on the game type. Next, we need to identify the different sources of inspiration for us as game designers. And these can take many shapes and forms, starting from novels, stories in general, moving on to theater productions, TV series, movies, games, and they can be either in competing games or in kind of non-directly related games. And then finally, from real life itself. And sometimes, the best stories are the ones that you find around you while you're doing your day-to-day life. So things like, listening to a kid trying to explain their imagination or tell you a story of their own. This can trigger an idea that hasn't been explored before and not really, influenced by other types of projects that you've encountered in the past as a game designer, which can lead to unique inspirational projects. Now, if your game does feature a story, then in this case you need to think about things such as the general high concept of the story. Is there a backstory to this world that you're building, a specific history that the player needs to know about? What are the character biographies? What in their past triggered their current behavior? This can lead to interesting, well-developed, well-rounded characters as opposed to kind of the one-dimensional side characters that you see in some video games. What are the motives that drive those characters? And then there's a concept called the hero's journey. So typically in movies, you start with the current status quo. The hero gets a specific type of calling, and this calling is a very important task or mission that should change the hero himself while going through it. So, and this kind of mission is going to start moving up in a linear fashion in terms of the events and the action surrounding the story until it hits a peak. There usually is a secondary phase where the hero loses all hope, where things fall apart, where it seems like you're going to fail the mission. And then there's this spark that kind of ignites and reignites the hero's interest in the mission until he or she sees it to its completion at the end, at the climax. And so this typical flow is what we see in movies and in some video games. And it's called the hero's journey in general literature. So this can be applied in varying orders to the game story that you're developing, depending on the type of game. But in general, it's a unique concept that's familiar for the viewers and for the players, and you can experiment with it to get some interesting results. Here's an example of a character profile that we've developed for one of our games called Out of Coverage. So it's an adventure game. So these are the kind of the character traits that the character is going to be exhibiting. So on an axis, so is he smart or incapable? Is he serious or funny? Where does his characteristics fall in within the spectrum? And then there are, certain visual and voice characteristics. So the accent, what kind of appearance he's going to be wearing, how does the player interact with this character in the game. And you do that for each and every character because this will define the art style later on. Now, the script itself is again similar to the ones found in movie scripts. Usually when you have a cutscene, this is what you're going to be sticking to. So one page is going to translate to 1 minute of events on screen. And you start to define all the different dialogue that will happen between the characters. If there is a scene set up, you need to define, is it, for example, a sunset scene? Is there a specific weather pattern that you want as a story writer to happen in this particular scene? And define where the different camera cuts are going to be taking place, when there's a fade in, fade out, etc. Then we move to sketches. So we start, based on the character profile, we start creating a general sketch for the character, just to define the general outline and the general strokes. We then go ahead and detail the character further and create different variations of the character to have kind of a repository of different designs that you can pick from later on for the character. So different clothing styles, different colors, different accessories, etc. Here, for example, Dania is one of our characters in an upcoming game called Rikaz. It's an action-adventure treasure hunting game taking place in modern-day Middle East. And so she's going to be in different environments, ranging from urban, modern-day environments all the way to deserts and ancient ruins found in different forests and different other locations. So what she wears needs to kind of reflect the environment that she's in. So on the left, you can see that we're using more hard leather, more kind of rough materials, as opposed to the more soft materials that are going to be used in the environment that takes place in an urban city or a marketplace, for example. Then the character sheet allows you to visualize how the character is going to look like from all different sides. Now, remember, the key aspect here in pre-production in general is to try to eliminate guesswork from any aspect of production later on, because now it's easy to change your mind. Later on, it's going to be expensive and it's going to be time-consuming. So whatever extra pieces of information you can provide to your production team, that's going to help them a lot later down the line. Here, for example, we went ahead and detailed all the different accessories that are available on the character, how they should look like in terms of real references that are found anywhere in clothing stores or on online retailers. For Dania, those are some real references that we sourced for the different jackets, the different gloves, and the bags. Next, we have the traditional storyboard. So similar to a comic book, the storyboard is an interpretation of the script in a visual form, with the initial kind of camera cuts and camera angles laid in front of the user. And so the goal here is to kind of get to an agreed upon vision for the entire scene or cutscene, how it will look like in the end. And those can change obviously in the end. So they don't tend to be very detailed or colored. So just something general that will allow you to kind of visualize and communicate your vision across. Next, we have the animatics. So with animatics, the goal is to move the camera, pan it across all the different shots, add music, voiceover, and maybe some visual effects, and come up with an early rough version of your cutscene or your game level. So this way it's animated, it's shown on the screen in the shortest amount of time possible. So you can make your changes, you can change your mind, change your camera angles, change the events, change the voiceover itself, alter the music to find something more fitting until you come across the perfect fit.
It's good to know someone will come and extract my body in case the quick load button doesn't work.
Next, we define the visual art style that we're going to be using for the project, ranging from realistic to different art styles such as the kind of the traditional retro pixel art, to a different art style such as cel shaded if you wanted to go for a cartoony look. So this will define how the assets are produced later on in the production phase. For whenever you have environments that are based on real world, you try to take photos, either visit the place yourself or, just use Google Images to find some, touristy photos. In our case, one of our levels in Rikaz takes place in Tangier in Morocco. And so we actually visited the place, even the Atlas Mountains, to take a lot of photo references of the entire area and try to kind of focus on the materials and what kind of crowds are available there, what kind of merchandise are on display, to reflect all that in the game. Next, we devise a level layout of the entire map. And now the game is going to be divided into several maps. Even on modern consoles, you're still limited by a certain amount of memory. So you need to divide your world into smaller maps. And those maps need to have a definitive starting place, starting point, spawn, end level triggers, and some actions that happen in the middle. Now, obviously on modern consoles, this is going to be a much bigger area, and some games are more open-ended in nature, so you don't need to follow a linear path. So that's okay, but you still need to have some kind of guidance for the player to know where to go next. And that's easier done on a top-down level layout, such as this one. Next, we build what is called as the block mesh. So this is a kind of a simple 3D construction of the 2D map that you saw in a 3D format that is set to the proper scale. So in theory, you can drop the player at the beginning of the level and actually have a walkthrough until you reach the end. And get a sense of how long it took the player to finish the level. If you have some enemies ready, you can drop them in and see how the encounter will play out before committing to the expensive production later on. Next, we move on to detailing the environment concept art. So each of those levels will get a kind of an artist treatment of the entire level, how to look like, what is the mood, what is the color theme that you want to reflect within the level itself. And this ends the pre-production stage. In the production stage, we start translating all the work that we've done in the previous phase into actual assets that will go into the game engine. So we do that through modeling, and modeling starts with simple dots called vertices. When those dots are connected together, they form edges. When 3 edges are connected together, they form a face. 2 faces will form a polygon, which will then make out the surface of the 3D object that you have in the end. Now this is directly related to how detailed the model is going to look. So the more triangle count that you have in the 3D model, the more detailed it is. So you can start with something similar, simple, and then start sculpting it and adding details and wrinkles on the different character parts until you reach the desired level of quality, depending on the platform that you're deploying on. Here, for example, we're using tools like ZBrush to sculpt the ultra high resolution version of the character. This can reach up to 30 million polygons for the character itself. And then we down-res it in the following step to a more kind of sensible polygon budget for the game engine. So this usually ranges between 3,000 to 50,000 for current gen and mobile devices, depending on how important the character is. In cloth tailoring, we actually create proper clothing patterns and sewing to get the exact look of the character. And this is then coupled with cloth simulation in the engine to make the cloth feel like real physics simulated cloth. Here's the kind of the polygon reduction phase. So on the left, you can find how the character will look like on a mobile version of the game. And then on the far right, on a kind of a previous gen character try count. Then you do the same for the different props. You add the detailing where needed, depending again on the importance of the character. You do the same thing for the environment props as well. So all the Lego pieces that will combine together kind of form the final look of the level. Next, we add textures that will define how the surface will look. This is done through 2 phases. So there's the textures themselves, the image itself that you find on different sources online that you apply to the surface. So things can be sourced from nature. From the nature itself, you can just grab a camera and try to kind of capture the surface definition yourself. You can get assets that are either free or paid from the different asset stores or from websites like gametextures.com and textures.com. But that alone is not going to make the material feel alive. And this is where the shading comes in place. So shading dictates how the surface properties are going to be of this particular material. So some surfaces are more reflective than others. So on the left, you can see some faint reflection on copper, for example. On the right, you can see perfect reflections on materials like the chrome. So you need to couple the surface properties with the texture in the previous step to arrive at the final material look. Now for characters, and even for vehicles and vegetation, we do something called rigging, which is adding those bones that are going to be hidden from the final output. So they're only used to help you to animate this asset later on. So here's an example of how the bones will look like inside of a 3D character or a 3D horse. And by moving through a process called skinning, you tie and you couple the bones with the surrounding geometry. And therefore, when the animator animates the bones, the geometry will follow. Animation can be done either through traditional keyframing, which is kind of labor intensive. It's hard to get exactly right because people have expectations of how the character should look like. But it's okay if your game style is stylized in the first place. On the other end of the spectrum, we have motion capture, the ability to wear a suit and have your real-life motion applied to the character rig that you have. And this will result, obviously, in a more realistic end result. And this can be applied to fingers and facial capture as well. The Lego pieces that I mentioned earlier is where the level assembly will come in. So utilizing all the different assets that we produced, you can start assembling the entire level based on all the kind of plans that we've done in the previous phase until we reach the final look of the level. At this point, we start adding lighting and making it, fit within the story and within what the scriptwriter decided in the previous phase as well. Here are different examples of interior lighting that we generate for interior locations and how they differ from the exterior settings. Now, typically, a movie will end at this stage in terms of production, but because it's a game, you need to worry about things like scripted events that will happen in the game to kind of guide the event itself and what the player will go through. There are things like what dictates the movement between different scenes, finishing the level, for example, killing different enemy AIs. Speaking of which, AI can have multiple forms. So there's friendly AI, there's crowd or neutral AI, and then there are enemies who are kind of bent on stopping the player from achieving their goal. There are other logic conditions, so things that you want to trigger about certain conditions. For example, entering a specific room or specific area, or when reaching a specific ammo count or health level, or upon the player pressing a specific button on the controller or keyboard or mouse. So we identify all that, and then this will cause an action to happen based on the desired flow. And this will end the production phase. In post-production, we start adding special effects such as explosions, fire, smoke, etc. We work on color correction, which gives the game a unique visual style. This is seen in things such as The Matrix, for example, where the famous green tint is kind of iconic for the movie. Same applies to movies like Mad Max Fury Road, where above you can see the real life shot, and then below you can see the stylized, color corrected look that's going to be iconic for this movie. We work on optimization by profiling, measuring the frame rate counts and the frame times, reducing the polygon budgets to fit within the memory of the desired platform, controlling the number of draw calls that compose the scene to reduce the kind of the burden on the CPU, and baking some lights while having some others be dynamic depending on the setup of the scene itself. Now that the game is ready, we work on functionality testing, making sure that everything functions as expected, and then compliance testing to make sure that everything fits within the platform holder requirements. Whenever you're showing a name, for example, for the platform, you need to add the proper capitalization, the proper trademarks. All these different things that are usually mandated by the platform holders need to be administered. Then you submit the game for age rating. There are different agencies such as the ESRB, PEGI, and GCAM in Saudi Arabia to rate the game and define what age group is suitable for this particular game. And then finally, you start marketing and publishers with the help of YouTubers, gaming websites, and gaming communities. I'd like to end this presentation with a conclusion of what's coming up next. So I created a website called Nologia. The goal here is to teach game development in more depth and more detailed and a more hands-on approach with a real-life project called Design Your First Game in Unity 3D. The course is available right now in Arabic, and it covers everything you need to know to create your first 3D game, comprised of one level that you can build upon later on. And now during December 2020, you can enter the promo code DGC2020 for a 50% discount on this website. Now, VGame is a platform that we are developing at Semaphore that is going to be our upcoming disruptive tech that will allow anyone to make any game on any platform. Now, sounds like a very big claim, but there's a real case study that we created called MISC Schools Quest. So we worked with the students of MISC Schools in Riyadh, grades 4 to 6, with 8 students in particular, to develop a game in 30 days with the help and support of Semaphore and using the VGame platform. In this game, the goal is to cure a computer virus that infested robots in the year 3020 without destroying those robots. The game is available right now on App Store and Google Play, and it's going to be available soon on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch, and Steam. Thank you very much for your time.
يعطيك العافية أخونا أحمد جد الله من سيمافور وجميع جهودك المبذولة في تطوير الألعاب ما قصرت. And now ladies and gentlemen to the state of play in the Middle East. والآن نبي نعرف زيادة عن الألعاب وعالم الجيمنج في الشرق الأوسط. معنا نواف من True Gaming وأخونا أحمد من Arab Hardware. Two amazing brothers in the gaming world. You do not want to miss this. الجماعة ذين يا جماعة حماسيين عجيبين في عالم الجيمنج. فحياكم معنا في هذه المحادثة مع نواف من True Gaming وأحمد من Arab Hardware.